Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call to order this regular City Council meeting of the City of Richfield. It is July 9th, and I believe it's actually 7:02 p.m. So if you're able, please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Before we move on to the open forum, I wanted to take a point of personal privilege and ask if the city manager would introduce our new city clerk.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. We want to welcome our new city clerk, Michelle Friedrich. She comes with 10 years of city experience and most recently was the city clerk for the city of Corcoran, and we are all thrilled that she is here. I also want to thank Administrative Assistant Kelly Wynn, because she has been serving as, where's Kelly, as interim clerk. Thank you, Kelly. And she has been doing that on top of all of her other duties, so we're very appreciative. So, and welcome again, Michelle.
So we all echo that. Thank you and welcome. All right, next we'll move on to the open forum. Just a reminder, if you wish to call in for the open forum, you can do so by dialing 1-415-655-0001. The meeting ID number is 2630-556-5366, and the password is 1234. If you're here this evening to speak, or if you're online wanting to speak, we ask people to limit their remarks to 3 minutes. If you could state your name and give your address, and then you can, there's a sign-up sheet that's over by the microphone, and then we'll let you have your 3 minutes, and we welcome everyone's participation. Is there anybody online at all? All right, so we're not seeing anybody online. So first we have, oh, and one other thing before we start is, we'll be listening and taking notes, but it's not like a back and forth type thing. And then if there's something that we need to follow up on, staff will follow up with you, or we'll get the answer for the public in the at the next meeting. All right, so first we have Heidi Geibor.
(915) Wentworth. I'm here to speak about Richfield roads tonight. What is happening in Richfield with our streets and ability to get from point A to point B? Our major thoroughfares are becoming a nightmare of roundabouts, 1 lane each way, and 25-mile-per-hour roads. The thoroughfares were originally made for motor vehicles to easily move around. They now cause confusion and frustration. A 25-mile-an-hour speed limit is a good thing for residential side streets, but for the thoroughfares, it makes no sense. The real risk for crashes and accidents on the roads is not a reasonable 35 miles per hour or a slow 30 miles per hour. It's inattentive driving. Regarding the proposed plan for all I can say is well-marked pedestrian crossings with flashing lights, more roundabouts are proposed, plus medians which cut off the side streets from accessing left turns onto Nicollet. This is counterproductive to making streets more easily navigable. As a car driver and walker, I would add that roundabouts are in reality more dangerous for pedestrians and bikers, demographics that the city says it wants to be mindful of. Please stay away from the idea of more roundabouts and medians, which will restrict traffic flow. There is also the idea to make the medians green. As time has borne out, this might sound nice in theory, but they require a budget for installation and long-term maintenance, which is difficult for small Richfield to fund, and therefore the maintenance is lacking. I do like the idea of having bike and pedestrian paths separated from traffic. Given rampant, inattentive driving, the painted line bike lanes have never been a safe idea. In the interest of safer, better flowing traffic, I would like to urge the City Council and other entities involved to revisit both the 25-mile-per-hour policy and the proposed plan for Nicollet Avenue, and perhaps put the focus on quashing inattentive driving. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Sharon Meister.
Good evening. Sharon Meister, 6414 Harriet Avenue South. And I live just down a house from the Linview Apartments. Since the Linview Apartments have opened, there is going to be no cleaning of the streets. There's going to be poor snow removal. This went on as it was being built. Also, cars block the driveway, they block our sidewalks, they block the fire hydrant, and they park on the street curb. Our trash, recycling, and yard waste is not picked up because the cars are parking in front of them. And the trucks cannot stop and pick it up or move the cars to get at it. So, and on 64th at the Riley Apartments, you have put in restrictive parking from November 15th to April 15th. And if they can't park there, they're going to park on our block because we're the closest ones there. So I am asking the city to look at new ways of having parking, city parking, because I realize streets are city property and anybody can park there. However, I think it is a bit hazardous, particularly to the daycare that is on our street, for people to be just parking anywhere at all times of the day and night. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Stephanie Sather.
Hello, I live at 6320 Clinton Avenue, Richfield resident, and this is my business partner, Becky Shoup. And I'm just here to try to get some information about the cannabis laws for Richfield, if there's any zoning or anything has been determined for Richfield. I would love, we're moving forward with applying for a license, and we would love to open in the city of Richfield and give back to the community and just essentially do cannabis the right way here. So that's what we are here for. Any questions, Becky?
No, we just wanted to introduce ourselves and tell us, put a face to somebody who may start a retail business in your city, and just what we can find out about that as we go forward and try to navigate the real murky waters of this whole thing. So I'm a Burnsville resident, but a Minnesota, born and bred and retired veteran. So we're applying early because we have the social equity to do so. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Shelley Yeager.
Hi, my name is Shelley Jager. I live at 6420 Harriet. I share the fence with the Linview apartment buildings. If you drive down the street, it looks like it's so close, it looks like it's eating my garage. When we first heard about this, we were told that they were going to provide like 200 parking spots. We went to a online meeting with Enclave. The thing I didn't understand until it was fully built is that they're charging for them. So they've got this whole second floor that hardly anyone is parking in. And so our street has become a parking lot. And what is happening to me is that my driveway is right at the entrance to their place, and we have the curve from Harriet to we're Harriet and 64th and a half. So people are parking on that curve. which is right at the end of my driveway. It's very hard for, we have to be really super careful we don't hit somebody. If we try and back in with like the truck with the boat or anything like that, it's hard. And when people park on that curve, it's hard to see around the curve when you're coming. And they will actually literally park on the curve. When the snowplow came through, it couldn't get through. So it would block my driveway with a little berm. So it causes a problem with the snow removal. Then when the cars are parked there, it builds up. It gets hard to go down the street. They park every day in front of the fire hydrant. And they've been doing that since the beginning. So basically, and what I have a concern about too is if you finally get some retail in there, I walked over there and there's maybe 3 or 4 spots. So it's hard. I mean, we had a nice quiet block. It felt safe. And now we've got cars zooming out of the parking lot. We've got cars parking, blocking our sidewalk. We had work done on my house, and we were just hoping that we could figure out a way where the people that were working on the house could park and all that. So basically, I don't know what would be possible. I know it's already built. I know it's already there. I know you can't make the people give free parking, but is it possible that they could park across the street, maybe in the parking lot east of LA Fitness? I don't know if the owners would let them do that, but it's hard. It feels like we don't have any rights anymore. The people, when they park their cars and they go grocery shopping, they're up in our yard and taking all their stuff out, and it's just, and we've actually had people, they walk their dogs up in our yard to go to the bathroom. And my husband, and I'm not sure if they're from this apartment building or the one behind me, my husband said, we don't allow dogs in our yard, and the guy gave him the finger. We've had people walking up our driveway, so we've really lost, it feels like we don't have any rights anymore. So I don't know what you can do, but it does cause a big problem in the winter. And, I need to get out to go to work. I think that's, like Sharon said, she lives right next door to me. We have problems with the garbage. We've got the daycare across the street. So my biggest issue is the parking and how we've lost our rights and our ability to move around and get around. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak here that's in person? Is there anybody that's signed in online? Okay, then we will finish up with open forum. It doesn't look like anyone else is going to be calling in. Thank you for everyone who participated. So we'll move on next to the approval of the minutes of the special council closed session of June 18th, 2024, and the city council work session of June 25th, 2024, and the city council meeting of June 25th, 2024.
Move approval of those minutes.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. For the people that spoke at open forum that are leaving, there will be further discussion about parking if you wish to stay. All right, so it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Is there any discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor of approving those 3 sets of minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the 3 sets of minutes. Next, we'll move on to approval of the agenda.
I'd move to approve the agenda.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Is there any further discussion? All right, all in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the agenda. Next, we'll move on to the consent calendar. City Manager Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mayor. The consent calendar contains several separate items which are acted upon by the City Council in one motion. Once the consent calendar has been approved, the individual items and recommended actions have also been approved. No further council action on these items is necessary. There's just one item on tonight's consent calendar. Item A, consider the adoption of a resolution identifying the need for livable communities pre-development funding and authorizing an application for grant funds on behalf of the Penn Station development, proposed for 6501-25 Penn Avenue South. And I submit the one item for your consideration as part of the consent calendar.
I'd move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Next, we'll move on to item number 4, and I'll turn it over to Councilmember Whalen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This item is the second reading of a transitory ordinance providing funding for certain capital improvements from the Liquor Contribution Special Revenue Fund. As part of the capital improvement budget and annual city budget process, certain special revenue funds are allocated each year to fund capital projects identified through the budget process. The source of the special revenue funds are profits derived from the city's liquor store operation. These profits are transferred to the Liquor Contribution Special Revenue Fund. Before the funds can be used for the identified capital projects, the city charter requires that a transitory ordinance be used to authorize the expenditure of the funds. The proposed funding for 2024, per the approved capital improvement budget, totals $500,000 and encompasses several park and recreation-related projects. They are listed out with specific amounts, but they include the Donaldson Park building demolition and rebuild, the Donaldson Park playground equipment, and then several multi-year maintenance projects at the ice arena, community center, major parks, and the Wood Lake building and fence. Does staff have anything to add for this item? Okay. Then I would move that we approve the attached transitory ordinance providing for the expenditure of funds from the Liquor Contribution Special Revenue Fund for the above listed capital improvements.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Whalen.
I have no idea if the folks that brought up these questions would also be listening to this meeting, but with the conversation this fall about ballot questions for park and recreation projects, the question came up around, well, don't we have the liquor stores to fund these kinds of projects? And the answer is yes, and that does not cover the full needs of our community if we want to maintain and continue to have all of the different amenities that we offer. The amount, for folks who have not paid attention to this before, the amount of somewhere between 400,000, but recently it's been most years 500,000, coming from liquor store profits to fund various park improvements. That's fairly standard. That is provided in my 5 or so years on the council. That has paid for every playground replacement that we've done. Lots of like refinishing different courts or like, and some of this ongoing general maintenance, but it does not add up to the multi-million-dollar projects that are being considered and decided on by voters this fall. And so happy to talk more with any residents who have further questions, but just wanted to clarify that the profit from our liquor stores is wonderful, allows us to do many things, and does not cover all of the needs.
Councilmember Troutman.
Thank you, Mayor, and that's such a good point that Councilmember Whalen makes. And for folks that may be listening, I just want to draw a couple of visual pictures of what we're investing in and what our limitations are. The Donaldson Park building demolition and rebuild, for folks that aren't familiar with, it served our community for a lot of years. And a lot of our buildings were built in the 70s with a lot of creative visions. One of the creative visions was an inverted roof. And so a roof where all the water comes right into the middle of which has like a certain lovely aesthetic. It's not long-term great. 50 years later, it's not great. And so when we're making investments for things like that. That leaves a budget for another very creatively built, but highly inefficient and falling down building in Wood Lake that we have $10,000 to try and manage both the fence and that alien property. So we're really grateful for, the more than $15 million we've gotten from the state and the federal government to make these investments. But that's why we're coming to you folks, because this is a really small budget and we have some really creative buildings that are in need of investment.
All right, is there any further discussion? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of approving the attached transitory ordinance, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, thank you. Next, we'll move on to item 5, which is the first reading of an ordinance amendment adjusting parking requirements, and I'll turn it over to Councilmember Hayford O'Leary.
Thank you. At its April 25th, 2023 work session on policy topic priorities, the council directed staff to examine parking requirements, to address a few longstanding issues, and to continue working on broader citywide objectives. A joint work session was held with the Planning Commission and City Council on February 26th, 2024. The attached ordinance is a result of the direction provided by council members and commissioners at the work session. In short, the ordinance updates the city parking requirements in the following ways. Number 1, it reduces the requirements for a Class 3 restaurant. 2, it creates requirements for libraries, museums, and art galleries. 3, it expands the council's flexibility in relation to non-driving populations. And 4, it adjusts the requirement for multifamily housing to be consistent across all zoning districts at 1.25. There's an additional note that although this is the recommended action is what was described, the additional note is that staff from several departments have concerns with this proposed change. While on-street parking is not a problem in theory, there are concerns with the design of some roadways that lead to safety issues, specifically a lack of sidewalks to replace the on-street walking space. Roadways less than 36 feet wide, particularly on east-west roads, that can make emergency vehicle access difficult when there is snow. Restrictions to on-street parking to address these issues increase the need for police enforcement and push parking deeper into neighborhoods, resulting in additional complaints. Staff recommends 1.5 stalls per unit, retaining and expanding current discretionary language and allowing the reduction to 1.25 only if conditions are met. They would add roadway width and orientation to the factors to be considered. However, if we adopt 4 as recommended by the Planning Commission, they suggest we revise the parking maximum for multifamily to ensure developments have the flexibility to secure financing. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on May 29th. The Commission recommended approval of the ordinance as presented and recommend that the City Council consider an additional study of the city's sidewalk policies and funding, as well as a study of reducing or eliminating parking minimums in areas of close proximity to high-frequency transit lines and stations. Staff agrees that there is a direct nexus between sidewalks and parking, as well as factors like road width, and that is why staff continues to recommend that the discretionary language be retained and expanded, and that's again referring to the 1.5, 1.25 discretion. At the June 25th council meeting, the council decided to postpone a vote and asked for the additional items. First, further discussion on discretion. Discretion allows the ability to consider the impact of parking reductions on the immediately surrounding area and to negotiate the mitigation of those impacts. Planning staff and the city attorney are discussing ways to link on-street parking to sidewalk construction. Additional city staff have submitted comments regarding staff's recommendation, which was in our packet. Alternate language, which is also in our packet. So the original drafted ordinance from the Planning Commission and staff's alternative recommendations are both before us. And a map showing the locations of the MR2 and MR3 zoning districts compared to the locations of the mixed-use districts, which already allow 1.525 units without discretion. The MR2 and MR3 districts are scattered throughout the city and tend to be in more residential areas. The mixed-use districts are mostly concentrated in the Penn Avenue corridor, the Cedar Avenue corridor, and along the I-494 corridor, and they have provided a zoning map. Does staff have anything to add before a motion or questions?
I do not.
Recognizing there may be additional feedback, I'd prefer to make the motion, and if there is a desire for an amendment, that we consider that after the motion. So I would move that we approve a first reading of an ordinance amendment to adjust parking requirements.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, which allows us to now have the discussion, and as you pointed out, if someone wants to make any amendments. Do we have questions for staff or anything that people would like to clarify? Councilmember Whalen.
I guess my first clarification question is is the motion on the table, since we have both the original recommended by the Planning Commission and this alternative, what is currently on the table?
The recommended action, which is the Planning Commission's. So we would need an amendment to change that to use the staff recommendation instead.
Okay. I would just, I would appreciate if staff are willing to share more about discretion, and it sounds like there are maybe some of my colleagues who want to discuss that more. I personally am more comfortable with the Planning Commission version that does not include the as much discretion, and my reason is just that, I mean, as someone who is not going to be on this council in a shorter time frame, but also, I mean, we make ordinances for when no one in this room will be making decisions based on them. I've seen other cities use every possible form of discretion to delay, reduce, or block housing development, and it's part of why we are 100,000 units short as a state of housing. And so I think the move is ultimately in recognition, in my opinion, there's other reasons for it, but one of the reasons for this move is that when parking maximums are too high, it increases the cost of housing and reduces the amount of housing that gets built. And I don't want to leave potential routes for future leaders to continue that trend. So I would say that I am more comfortable, at least so far, with the not adding extra discretion, but would appreciate hearing from staff or colleagues that are pushing for that to understand why.
All right. Other comments or questions? Councilmember Hayford O'Leary.
I agree with Councilmember Whalen. I think we've made a conscious effort to have clear, good rules in different ways with our zoning. We had a big discussion about that with duplexes. Providing predictability is important. And I think we already have a discretionary thing, which is the ability to reduce for non-driving populations. The only discretion we'd be giving up is not being able to require more than 1 1/4 in these situations. It was actually really helpful to have, and I imagine we'll hear more directly from staff, to have the written feedback to both hear the potential problems from police and fire, as well as the potential problems from Public Works. And the Public Works had an alternative idea that was sort of separate from this ordinance, which is, could we just be more proactive with restricting street parking in these areas? And to me, that seems like a dramatically better approach. We heard tonight from some folks who live near things in the mixed-use district. What we're considering tonight would not increase the parking requirements in those areas, and it certainly can't increase parking requirements where buildings are already built. The only question before us is, do we want to require or continue to require more parking just in those limited, non-mixed-use MR2, MR3? And I see no reason that we should have a different requirement for them than mixed use. Another good example that I saw tonight, that development that is causing problems, Linview, has 1.5 parking spaces per unit, and there's still a problem because they still charge for parking and people want to use the free parking that's available. All this would do to increase the required parking would be, cars would still be on the street, we'd have more empty parking spots, we'd have less affordable housing. So I just don't think it gets what we get at, but I support what Public Works had in mind. I would also say I'd be happy to suggest a more comprehensive approach as part of a future council policy topic, because I think that really addresses the issue. The issue isn't how much off-street parking there is. The issue is there too much parking concentrated, or is it not being well enforced on the street? One additional thought I want to just put in front of us. I recognize that, taking time to figure out where those no parking zones go, figure out one-side parking and enforcing creates a staff burden. And we do our best to keep a lean staff to make sure that time is being used well. But just before this, in the HRA capacity, we approved a $1.5 million subsidy to bring more affordable housing to Richfield. That's a pretty significant subsidy to then go and say we can't make housing more affordable because we can't put up some no parking signs and we can't have police occasionally enforce that. If we're willing to subsidize housing affordability to such a large extent, so commonly, I think we can subsidize it via some staff time to create reasonable parking restrictions and to enforce them. So I think that's a better approach. I certainly support that. But for the main decision tonight, I strongly support 1 1/4 as recommended by the Planning Commission.
Great. Other comments or questions? Okay. We've had a request to hear from staff. I have some comments later too, but let's hear from staff first of all, if each of the departments could say something.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll start from the community development perspective. I think that our preference for discretion stems primarily from an access issue and safety on the streets. When we are spilling over the parking onto our adjacent residential streets, which in theory, the planning staff does not have an issue with. The issue for us is then we're removing where people are currently walking and biking and replacing it with cars and not replacing that with anything else. Right now, our development standards require that a new development install sidewalks around the entirety of their property. Which is great. I think that's a good requirement. We should continue to do that. However, the parking often spills beyond the boundaries of that property. I don't think that the parking adjacent to the property itself is most often the issue. It's when it's spilling down the side street. If we are then restricting parking, in addition to the enforcement issues, we're pushing that problem farther into the neighborhood, although perhaps it's dispersed at that point. By retaining this discretionary language, I think planning staff would like to use it as a negotiating tactic that, as is mentioned in the staff report, we've been in discussions with the city attorney about a trade. If you'd like to reduce your parking, then we want you to construct a sidewalk, which is the alternative ped and bikeway on that block where your parking is potentially going to spill over. It allows us to address a primary safety concern. So I think that from a planning perspective, that is our primary reason for wanting to retain that discretion. It gives us something, some negotiating power.
All right. Did the fire department have anything to say?
So from a fire department perspective, I think the challenges that have been raised about parking restrictions within the city, I would just say that if we have an incident, even in a summer day, between the fire trucks arriving, even if it's a fire call would create a stop in a street. A medical call, which we do about 13 times a day, creates a stop in a street. And that's in the summertime. In the winter, it just gets worse. The last accident we had was because of a congested parking area. So I like the idea of being able to maintain some leverage and not create a broad standard.
Thank you. Police department?
Madam Mayor, Council. Yep, public safety has some concerns related to these limitations. The first one is related to our disabled community or people with mobility issues. Ultimately, they might have to park further away from their destination. So that's one concern. Secondly, if we take away off-street parking well, the streets in Richfield are narrow, and everything the fire chief is talking about, it becomes a traffic safety issue for us. People navigating those narrow streets with additional on-street parking just becomes an issue. It's a safety issue. And then to follow up on that also, cluttered or streets cluttered with off-street public streets cluttered with off-street parking, specifically not by a bike path or a sidewalk, that becomes a hazard in our view to cyclists and pedestrians. We all think about the kid. The visibility is messed up, right? We think about the kid running out between the parked cars to get the ball or whatever like that, or at intersections, the visibility becomes an issue. And then one other issue I thought about walking down here was cars parked on the street become an opportunity for additional crime with the vehicle break-ins that we have in town and stuff like that. So it's really 4 issues that we have then.
Thank you. Did Public Works want to add anything?
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. For the audience in attendance, my name is Joe Powers. I'm the city engineer. Public Works concerns with this potential change to the ordinance really revolve around maintenance of our roadways, as well as supporting our public safety response and the issues that Director Paleman noted and retaining that flexibility. We would prefer to retain the flexibility in the policy. We feel that we can approach these developments with more of a context and site-specific lens at that point. The reality is that there are some areas in town where adjacent roadways close to developments just aren't going to be suitable for on-street parking. They're probably few and far between, but there are areas. And our concern is that in those areas, having more on-site parking would be a likely better solution. And we are concerned that in those areas where there's very little available on-street parking, we'd have to have excessive restrictions. That would push this parking further and further out into neighborhoods.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? You have a question? Go ahead.
My question, so again, this is already the standard where most of our redevelopment occurs in the mixed-use districts. Could you speak to why it makes sense to have a higher standard only for this MR2, MR3 district versus where most redevelopment happens?
I'm going to say I'm not an expert on the different zoning districts. So from a public works perspective, I think this is kind of a citywide policy that we're concerned about.
Okay.
And maybe Director Paleman can expand on that.
Thank you. I will say that this is the standard already in the mixed-use districts, and that is where we're experiencing some of these pinch points, and why I think that we're asking to add roadway design into the discretion because of the issues that we've had at some of these other developments. The MR2 and MR3 districts are farther away from the commercial districts. They're not the hub. They're a little bit more tucked into the neighborhood, and potentially we're looking at expanding where those MR2 and MR3 districts are, particularly along our high-frequency transit lines. So I think it's because of where they're located and the issues that we have that we're recommending this.
All right, other comments from any council members that haven't spoken? Otherwise, I can weigh in, but I was going to let everybody else have a chance to speak. I have 2 or 3 different issues. As far as choosing between the original version and the alternate version that would allow the discretion, given the concerns that we've been hearing, I would prefer to allow for the discretion. We can always tighten it up later, but I would prefer the staff recommended version so that we have some negotiating room and some discretion, because I think there have been a number of issues that have been coming up. And I was pleased that Councilmember Hafer-O'Leary asked for a map of where the mixed-use districts were and where the MR2 and MR3s were, because that helped when I saw that visual, because it does seem like the MR2 and MR3 are more buffer between like higher density things and commercial, if I'm not mistaken, or excuse me, and residential, if I'm not mistaken. So I think there's going to be more of these issues happening in those places, so we need to work out what our procedures are. The second thing, though, is when we look at what we currently have and the mixed use, we have some things that we need to clean up and need to figure out. And so one of the things I think it would be helpful if we can let residents know what the procedure is, like to request a change in parking signs or to request a change, like I think there's like a traffic control committee and some of that. So before I finish my comments, could someone explain what the procedures are if you think that you want to request parking to be restricted or some other change?
Yes, Madam Mayor, we do have a traffic control committee. It's an internal staff committee. It's made up of representatives from Public Works, Community Development, Public Safety, including police and fire. So there's on the website, the city website, residents can submit a traffic control committee, or basically a traffic control issue, complaint, concern. We bring those to the committee, and we discuss those on an individual basis. And when we get those types of requests, if we get a request for parking restrictions, for example, we're going to look very specifically at that area. We're going to look at roadway widths. We're going to look at surrounding uses. Really, a lot of the things that are kind of in this discretionary language in the ordinance are the things that we talk about in this committee. And we make a determination on what we feel the best practices or best solution for this particular issue. The committee then makes a recommendation to the city manager, who ultimately approves or denies the committee's recommendation. And so typically if we looked at an issue with parking and we found that it was warranted, there are safety issues, there are access issues, then we would probably recommend some sort of parking restriction. And I'll just add a note that I think Public Works staff and the Traffic Control Committee is not necessarily opposed to this ordinance change, but we do want to be very clear that we feel it will result in areas that are going to need to have more restricted parking. And so that's going to be additional staff time across multiple departments. We're not opposed to that, just want to be clear.
Councilmember Troutman.
Thank you, Mayor. You bring up a couple of really good points, and one question I had in particular with regards to that committee, which I hope under any circumstance will continue to become more robust. It sounds like there's consensus that we're going to utilize that more, but just hearing from both of our chiefs about these issues arising, mostly I've heard of the traffic committee being utilized by residents. Do staff have the ability interdepartmentally to utilize that, and do they utilize that to say, hey, we appreciate having tools for our residents, but also staff? I haven't heard of staff utilizing it. Maybe it's primarily staff. I'm just curious if you could speak to that.
Sure. It is primarily resident requests or business owner requests, community requests, but it's open to staff. We do consider staff issues. For example, at our last meeting, we considered a staff request for some parking restrictions based on utility maintenance in a certain area. Mm-hmm. So, yep, it's open to anybody who would like to submit a request.
Okay, I think you make a really good point that if we move forward, we would expect that and would invite those requests not just to come from residents, but from our chiefs and other folks to say, hey, we really do need no parking here. We need to have more access, and that feels like a great use of a committee that's already in existence. So thanks for that.
Can I ask one other clarification question about that? I mean, we talked about things like stop signs and no parking. Mm-hmm. Can it be used to clarify something like saying parking's permitted here? Because I sense there's confusion on Lyndale Avenue. Like if you're north of the roundabout on, I don't remember if it's 65th, I think on 65th, mm-hmm. There's a whole strip that I believe was supposed to be on-street parking, but there's no parking signs by the roundabout, which refer to the roundabout, and I don't see anybody parking there. And we've heard from residents tonight in open forum that they're parking behind the building when there's a whole strip of parking that could be used in front. So I don't know, is that an appropriate use of that committee to suggest something like putting parking permitted signs up, or?
Yeah, no, that's a perfect use for that committee. If there's confusion about where parking is permitted and not permitted, if it's something that we feel that we get the request and we feel is a fairly clear answer, it may not go to the committee. We may just answer it at a staff level and clarify that. But if it's something that we might want to consider changing restrictions or adding or taking away signage to further clarify things in the public, then that would go to the committee. And we have had those types of requests in the past.
All right, Councilmember Hayford O'Leary.
I guess I'm curious. So my understanding is Public Works, when there's a major development like a new apartment building, you do some sort of review already, like where the driveways are going to go and that sort of thing, the utilities?
Yeah, that's correct.
Could you potentially look at parking restrictions at that point in the process?
Yes, I think that's something that we're considering at this point, and I noted that in my staff comments that were in the report, that there hopefully be an understanding from the council that if we are going to restrict parking, it might even come at that plan review point before issues arise.
Yeah, and I will say, and this is sort of half commentary, half directly response, I think every issue that I've heard from police and fire would be better addressed by parking restrictions on the street than requiring more off-street parking. That said, even if the direction were to go with the higher parking requirement in MR2, MR3, I still think that would still be useful. I struggled on 64th Street to, get action on those parking signs. We eventually did, but it's really tough to teach people new habits after they've learned they can park there. We don't have any issue on one side parking in areas where it's been established for years. We do have issues retraining people, and that becomes a bigger burden. So if we can be proactive, I think that's in everybody's best interest.
So I had another question for public safety. It was mentioned during the open forum about people parking by fire hydrants and those types of things. And I know you do patrols and look for things, but if a resident notices something like that, do they call the non-emergency number, or what's the procedure that's followed for that?
Yep, absolutely, Mayor. If a citizen sees an issue, a parking issue, any issue, they can call the non-emergency number and report that. And then we can come out and take enforcement action or advise a homeowner or whoever it is to either move the vehicle or cite it. So.
All right, Councilmember Whalen.
I would put a maybe more pointed to that piece. Minnesotans were not always good at tattling on other people. The city will never know someone's parked in front of a fire hydrant unless you call it in and tell us. That's not being rude. That's just like how we take care of that. So very much second that. My question, I, like Councilmember Hayford O'Leary, I agree, continue to think that this is more of a question about parking restrictions and less about how much parking is required or not. Again, because this is the minimum that developers can and do build more than that. But I guess I'm not hearing any staff response to the very real phenomenon that Councilmember Hayford O'Leary named, where places that have built more parking than required still have on-street parking. And to me, that feels like the biggest, argument, reason for this to be a conversation. This safety and like street maintenance conversation to be about parking restrictions and not about parking requirements. I'm wondering if staff from any department have anything to speak to that specific point of places where there is more than enough parking by requirement, but we're still seeing on-street parking in places that are causing issues.
Councilmember Whalen. I think when parking is available freely on the curb outside of your property, particularly in nice summer weather, you're going to park there rather than in a stall where you have to pay. Because parking costs are generally in new buildings now unbundled, which is something that we are in favor of, because if you don't have a car, you shouldn't be subsidizing the people that do. By putting parking restrictions in adjacent to or in the adjacent low density areas because of safety concerns or whatnot, it could perhaps force people to say, well, gosh, now it's too inconvenient for me. I don't want to park a block away from my building. I was willing to park, half a block away. But now, especially in the winter, I'm just going to pay for my parking. So it could force more people to park in the lot. I also think there is an equilibrium here. Those building owners, it is in their best interest to rent those spots. It does take time, and particularly right now with staffing challenges that buildings are having, that everyone is having, that doesn't seem to be something that management companies are focusing on. They're focusing on their units instead of adjusting their parking costs. But it is in everyone's best interest to have the parking stalls on site utilized for whatever they might be able to charge for them. Does that help?
Some, and maybe it's less of a question and just sharing my opinion, but we see the same thing on streets that are all single-family homes, that there's some that are wide open and some that consistently have half the block fully parked. And there's safety concerns to that too, and that doesn't mean that the people who built those homes should have built maybe a 3-car garage instead of a 1-car garage. We allow parking on our streets. If the issue is where people are parked on our streets, then I feel like we should limit that and not, it's tens of thousands of dollars per additional parking space that I think will come back to us as requests for more public funding for these projects if we're requiring more parking spaces.
So a clarification question, because a resident called and spoke to me about wondering if we could require the developers to put in free parking inside the building. And I think you mentioned that, but can you go back over that again?
Sure. First of all, maybe a question for the city attorney is whether or not we could require that by ordinance, that they provide free parking. Philosophically, I don't think it's in line with the city council's goals to require them to provide free parking. Parking is very expensive. It is a high cost item as part of these developments. And we're asking for affordable units in these developments. We're building transit, pedestrian, and bicycle facilities to try to help our residents who do not, either by choice or by means, own a car. Philosophically, I do not think that we want those residents to be subsidizing those that have vehicles. So city attorney might have to help me on whether or not we legally would be able to require that.
Mayor and council, having only thought about this for about 30 seconds, my initial reaction would be, I think it could be problematic. And I guess the reason I say that is it's really a business decision and more of a private matter about how they would want to run that property and run that business. And I'm not sure, I don't know, but my gut reaction to it, initial reaction, is I think it could be problematic legally to make that a requirement of the city. But that's just my sort of off the top of my head response.
All right, other questions or comments? Councilmember Troutman?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, and thanks to staff and my colleagues. I appreciate the input. I've lived in Richfield for most of my life, and also I'm an alum of living in Loring Park, where parking is at a huge premium, and walking 3 blocks is not unheard of in the winter. And I have to say that I'm in favor of the Planning Commission's proposal, but feel more comfortable with it if we're utilizing the Traffic Committee to really address particularly problematic areas, also for residents to be able to do that too. So I'm going to support the motion, but with the understanding that we need a more robust and maybe even more timely process, or whatever we can do to facilitate that, not just for residents, but also for different staff and different departments that we can timely address their concerns.
All right, other comments or questions? Councilmember Whalen?
It may be moot, as I think that is a third person interested in the Planning Commission recommendation, but I was confused also in the alternate version why the discretion, if I think I'm reading the correct line on page 3 of the alternate one, under multifamily dwellings, it says 2 spaces per unit may be reduced to 1.25 per unit if factors warrant. I guess I thought the maximum we were considering was 1.5, and then maybe my last comment in favor of the original version is just, if we went with discretion, I would want it to be a lot more specific than if factors warrant, and would be more comfortable with a default of 1.25, maybe increased to something if factors warrant, rather than starting from the upper end. But again, perhaps, I guess, if, Councilmember Christensen, you haven't weighed in yet, but perhaps if we are no longer considering the alternate version, then we don't need to spend time on that.
Councilmember Christensen?
I think looking at the different developments in the city, the planning and the developers have to come together for some kind of an agreement. I think of where personally where I am living, the underground parking is 1 car per unit. If you have an additional one, you park elsewhere, and they do have a ramp available, close by that they can made arrangements with the owners of that ramp to park in a lower level. So if something like that could be negotiated with the developers perhaps, or something, and personally, we don't pay for our parking. It's probably blended right into the rent. And if the developers could do some kind of arrangements with the tenants, whether it be affordable tenants or maximum amount paying tenants, whichever, they would come to an agreement, because those streets in that area are very limited. They're very narrow, and I drove down one the other day for some other reason, and I thought to myself, this is in the summer with double parking. How can a fire truck get through here? How can an ambulance get through here? How can a police car get through here? 2 cars coming at each other from different distances, you can't do it. You have to move somewhere. And so with these people, with new developments like Linview is, like some of the residents say, that some kind of consideration needs to be done with the existing streets, and that's just the way the streets were built back then. They didn't have as many cars, but now we do, and this is something that we need to deal with. So.
All right, other comments or questions? So from what I'm hearing, I think there's consensus that we need to make sure that we are utilizing the tools we have for the developments that have already been built, to make sure we take care of fire concerns, public safety concerns, plowing concerns with public works, street maintenance concerns, that we need to make sure we go back and fix some of those things. And what I'm also hearing is people are saying, any new developments, we need to be proactively thinking about some of this instead of trying to retrain people. So I think that seems to be a consensus, and I would like, if we can even put out information for people that aren't here tonight or aren't listening tonight, for how you can make those requests for changes for parking and those types of things. As I said, I prefer the alternate version that the staff is doing, because I think we need more discretion. Obviously, I'm going to be outvoted on that. So I didn't have an issue with some of the other things like parking for the libraries or museums and that kind of things, but I do think we need more discretion, and I may end up voting no on this whole thing because of that. But pragmatically, if that's going to pass, then we need to deal with the parking maximums. Because one of the things it talked about here in the staff report is that if you have the maximum as a percentage of the minimum and we lower the minimums, sometimes you are affecting what that maximum is, and then people have trouble getting financing. And so I don't want to have an unintended consequence there. So I do think if we end up doing this, I want to make sure that we revise the parking maximum for multifamily to ensure that developments have the flexibility needed to secure financing. And I know this is a first reading, so I don't know how if we need a motion to that effect, or to amend the things, or what would happen? Director Palman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That is incorporated into the Planning Commission's recommended ordinance. So if you are going to vote on the recommendation, the revised maximum for those districts is included.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. I know I was looking at previous ones from last time too. The other issue I had has to do with ADA parking. How will this affect, because I think that's also done on a percentage basis. Can we require additional parking for people with disabilities, or is it all going to be dependent on what we require here?
Madam Mayor, good question. The handicap parking is prescribed by the building code. It's generally done sort of, I describe it in pods. So for each pod of parking, there is a requirement based on the overall amount of parking. Let's say it's a range of if you have between 1 and 50 parking stalls, you are required to provide 2 handicap stalls. So this change, which overall is going to be a fairly minor adjustment in a large pod of parking and with those ranges, I don't anticipate making a large difference in terms of the amount of handicapped stalls. One other thing to note is that our building inspector does interpret the building code to say that if there are accessible units, that there needs to be a handicap parking stall for each of those accessible units. So we are providing more than just kind of the base code based on our inclusionary housing policy and the way that he interprets the building code. So for the ordinance before you tonight, I do not anticipate this causing a problem.
All right, thank you for that clarification. Are there other questions? All right, Councilmember Hafer-Leary.
I don't have anything more to say on what's before us, but I do just want to say briefly, since we got everybody here thinking about parking, I do want to note our streets are really wide compared to most streets in the metro. 36 feet is exceptionally wide, and this has come up actually. When we wanted 20 miles per hour as our default speed, Public Works said, no, your streets are so honking wide, there's no way you're going to get people to go 20 on those. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but you did cite the large street width as a reason why cars were going to go so fast through our neighborhoods. So I understand, I think it's true that both wide streets can add some safety benefits and some safety costs, but I guess I'm just hoping as different departments are aware of these issues that we bear that in mind. So if I don't know enough about fire trucks, but if there are options for narrower fire trucks when you're doing equipment purchases anyway, that perhaps we not commit ourselves to always having a future of 36-foot wide streets, because in a lot of ways there are significant trade-offs to having those. And I will just say that that's wider than any of our neighbors build. Bloomington's are narrow, Minneapolis are narrow, Edina's are 10 feet narrower, so we have big streets. All right.
That also brings up the issue that came up earlier this evening at the HRA meeting, talking about things like, and Director Palman mentioned it, having where sidewalks are required and the difference between an east-west street and a north-south street, and walking around certain neighborhoods that if you're going north and south, it's a nice wide street, but if you're going east and west, it isn't. And so I think some of that needs to be considered as far as when we're putting in the parking restrictions. And I'd rather be proactive on those than reactive. We do need to clean up some things apparently, so we do have to be reactive for a while here. But going forward, would like us to be proactive and thinking ahead on those things. And I know the sidewalk is going to be a large discussion because there's a whole lot of variables and unintended consequences there, and that's not what we're voting on tonight. But I do wish that we would be proactive and think through all of these things. Any other comments before we take the vote? All right. So we have the motion before us to approve a first reading of an ordinance amendment to adjust parking requirements, and it was clarified it would be the original version that was put forward by the Planning Commission. Is all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, and I'm going to vote no. And so it has passed 4-1. So the next thing that will happen is this will come before us at our next meeting as a second reading. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. In 2 weeks, you should see a second reading and a summary publication of the ordinance.
All right, thank you. And I also want to say thank you to staff for weighing in with all the recommendations, because that's something we did ask for, to get like a real robust discussion and to hear what everybody thought about it, so we can consider all the factors. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right, so moving back to the agenda, let's see. We are on to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I also wanted to thank staff for coming tonight and providing feedback and sending it ahead of time, and also to council for asking for additional feedback. I appreciate it. We've had, earlier tonight, we discussed cannabis, time, place, manner regulations, and that was a cross-departmental project, and parking is as well. So it was good to see the team working together, so thank you. And then also, at past open forums, there has been some discussion and suggestions about Richfield being a charter city and not having to follow state law when it comes to some recent changes. And so I've asked City Attorney Teachin to clarify that.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I won't give you too long of a report on charter and statutory cities, but I'll give you the very, very brief version. Statutory cities derive powers from state statutes, and charter cities, which Richfield is one, derive powers from city charters. It does not mean, however, that charter cities are exempt from all other general laws. In fact, any specific state statute typically will define what a city is for purposes of applying that law. And one example is the sacred settlement legislation, which the resident brought up that, in his opinion, that Richfield did not have to comply with that because it's a charter city. And actually, that statute defines city as any city, no matter how the city is organized. So that's just one example of a statute that makes it clear to which cities the law applies. And so that's my sort of abbreviated, short explanation of that issue.
Thank you. Is there anything else for the city manager report? All right. Next, we'll move on to claims and payroll.
I would move claims and payroll.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve claims and payroll. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of approving claims and payroll, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we've approved the claims and payroll. Next, we'll move on to hats off to hometown hits, and we'll start off with Councilmember Whalen.
Thank you, Mayor. I imagine others may comment on this as well, but my biggest hats off is to our Richfield 4th of July committee, everyone who made all of those events possible, everyone who wrestled with the hard decisions about whether. I got to watch the parade for the first time ever, actually. I've been in it a lot, but got to watch it for the first time with my wife and son, and that was lovely, despite the rain. And so, yeah, just huge thank you. Hats off to everyone who played a role in organizing that. And then, of course, I know our staff, in addition to the fun part of just being in the parade, had a lot of logistics work to help make those events possible as well. So thank you to everyone. And then the other hats off I want to give is my wife and son got to be part of the story time at Augsburg Park, and would highly recommend that to anyone else with small children. It was a lovely opportunity.
Thank you. Councilmember Christensen.
Yes, I would also like to thank the 4th of July committee. I met with them, I spoke with them every week at the farmer's market, and they extensively telling me about different things that they were planning and different things, contingency plans, and it was a very tough call with the fireworks this year, and but I believe they did a very excellent job explaining why they could not do the fireworks, why they had to cancel things at certain times during the day, but it worked out well. So and the other hats off also is to the farmers market and what they do every week is phenomenal. They're growing, they're expanding beyond the pavilion area, and they're bringing a lot of different, wide variety of things, so. That's it.
Thank you. Councilmember Hayford O'Leary.
I also give a quick thanks to the 4th of July Committee, as well as our staff for assisting. I talked with a few people from REC. Of course, police and fire were very visible, and I'm sure there were other departments there as well. I'm sure Public Works coordinating. So much of our time gets focused on nitty gritty, like the long discussion about parking or just, sort of keeping the lights on as a city. But these events are things that like really make it feel like a community, and they're so important. And so them helping restore this tradition after a really difficult set of years is so important, and I wish them the best next year. I do also want to just say how excited I am for the Nicollet Avenue Open House. I was going to mention to somebody who spoke during open forum with concerns about Nicollet, there will be the open house tomorrow, 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. at the community center. Transportation Commission has spent a bunch of time on this. They've been very present at the open houses, engaging with the community, as well as city and county staff and our consultants. So I think they've got a really good draft design, and I hope people come and give the best possible feedback to make it even better.
Thank you. Councilmember Troutman.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm reminded everything's been said, but it's not yet been said by everybody. My heart just is bursting with thankfulness and gratefulness and joy to all the volunteers and everybody who invested time. That includes definitely our staff. It certainly includes our 4th of July committee, Steve Schneerberger, and so many others that just people. I don't know if they understand how many hours, how many days it takes to organize something like that. Thank you, thank you. It just made it feel like Richfield of old. It was a restoration of something really beautiful. And also a special thank you for everybody who stands up and leads. And then when something doesn't happen the way we want it to, and people are really passionate about that. For everybody that led and then took that energy, thank you. That is part of leadership, and you don't get paid for being on the 4th of July committee. You just, you have the thanks of a grateful community, and so I just want to say that multiple times. It was incredible, and looking forward to participating as a citizen next year.
Thank you. I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who spoke at Open Forum and has been participating and reaching out and giving feedback to council members. It's really important to hear what the community has to say so we can make better decisions, and so I really appreciate that. I want to do a kudos to Bloomington Public Health, which incorporates Richfield, Edina, and Bloomington. And we received word today that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, has given us reaccreditation for the Public Health Accreditation Board. So that required, you had to go through a lot of documentation and a lot of site visits and things like that were going on. And not everybody does that. And so I just want to say hats off to Bloomington Public Health for being reaccredited. And thank you to everybody that was part of that process. Also, I see Fire Chief Dobish is in the audience, and I want to say a thank you to the fire department because I know there's been a number of things happening with branches falling on power lines and electrical fires, and I really appreciate all of the work that the fire department's been doing and also the coordination with all of the neighboring departments. I mean, we've gone over to help Edina, they're coming over to help us. We help out at the airport, they help us, and I think it's phenomenal how all the different departments work together. So I wanted to do a hats off to that. I also found out about something that I don't know if anybody else knows about this, but apparently the neighbors around Jefferson Park have put together, they've worked in cooperation with the city to put together a wildflower garden, and it's next to the playground. And they had their open house tonight from 6:30 to 8. But if you're stopping by Jefferson Park sometime, you probably want to check out their work. And I want to thank everybody, all the neighbors and all the staff and everybody that worked together on that. And finally, I did want to do a thank you, as well as everybody else did, to everybody involved with the Richfield 4th of July. It was great to see everybody coming together. I was over there at the street dance on July 3rd, and it was just fun to see the multi-generational group of people there, from the little kids dancing to the people that were my age and older, and everybody having fun together. So, so thank you to the committee, to the volunteers, and to the staff and everybody who worked together, and to all the residents that came out and celebrated, because I think that's important too, because you can plan everything. If nobody shows up, you don't have the celebration either. So thank you to everyone. And with that, if there's no further business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn the meeting. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, and we've adjourned the meeting. Thank you. And City Clerk Friedrich, you made it through our first council meeting.